Today we're looking at the Behringer UB2222FX-PRO. This video will be similar to the Behringer 1204FX guide that I've previously done. There is quite a fair bit of similarity between the two mixers. This mixer has a few more advanced features, such as a parametric EQ, the ability to insert into each channel, and the mixer also supports subgroups.
First, we're going to have a look at the mono channel strip and the inputs. There are two inputs, an XLR input, usually used for microphones, and a 1/4 inch TRS, or a tip ring sleeve, balanced or unbalanced input. So this is a mono input. You can plug things like CD, tape, etc. in here. You can only use either the XLR or the 1/4 inch input. You cannot use both at the same time. As you can see in channel 1 I've got a microphone input, and in channel 2 I've got a phone plugged in where I'll be playing music from. Something worth noting, if you've got a stereo signal, you don't want to put it into this mono section. You want to use the two stereo inputs on the stereo channels. So the best way to input a stereo signal is to have a cable that has two separate mono feeds. You can put in one for the left and one for the right into a stereo channel.
To use the insert jacks, you need a special cable. From the TRS plug, you'll receive a copy of the input signal in the channel that you plug it into. On the other end of the cable there are two mono 1/4 inch plugs. One of these will be your input to your external device. The other is for the return signal back into the mixer. You'd most normally run this connection when you want to alter the input signal, such as a compressor. You wouldn't normally run an insert for effects.
After the input connections, there's a low cut switch. This can be either up or it can be down. What it does, it rolls off the frequencies lower than 75 Hz. The easy way to remember, a subby usually runs around about 80 Hz. So think of this as things that you don't want bleeding into the subbies. So for example, you can take it off music, you can take the filter off bass guitar, and you can take the filter off drums. On the microphone, you definitely want it on. It will help get rid of some of the handling noise. The next dial we look at is the trim. This is probably the most important and hardest thing to understand on a mixer. This adjusts the input level so that your device doesn't distort. The key is to find the maximum setting of this dial where your input doesn't distort. To do that, you need to input the loudest signal you can. If it's a microphone, ask the person to sing as loud as they will during their performance. On each channel strip, there's a solo button. Press it and the red light above it will come on. This indicates what channel you'll be listening to when you set the gain. Press the solo button on the channel that you want to set the gain for. Only set the gain on one channel at a time. Now you can use the LED meters to set your input gain. There's two modes on this display. Currently we have it in solo or normal mode. We want it to put it into PFL, so pre-fader listen. So engage the pre-fader listen button, and now that we've only got one channel light lights up. We've got lights that go from
-30 to 0, then to +10.
We want to set our volume at 0. So while checking, keep turning the microphone gain up and you'll hear it getting louder and louder. So now there's quite a bit of noise. I'm going over the 0 mark, so I've got to come back down. Check 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So most of the time when I talk, it's up around the 0 mark. So that's what we want. So we need to remember that we can't turn it up any more than its current location. The slider is at 0 on channel 1, but on channel 2 and 3 the sliders are too far down. That's because the input gain is too high, even though it's not clipping. So we can drop the input gain on these two channels by turning the gain knob to the left until we can position both sliders at the 0 position. Just remember at any stage, if you have to increase the volume back up, you need to PFL the channel and make sure you don't clip as you turn the gain up.
There are two different styles of EQ on this board. The mono channels have a high, a middle parametric EQ, and a low, whereas the stereo channels have a high mid, a low mid, and a low EQ.
It is preferable just to make minor adjustments to each EQ band, because the more you adjust, the more it may sound unnatural. The high EQ works at 12 kHz, and this will adjust the very high tones, sort of like the tones you'd hear when a cymbal is hit. or the sibilants in your voice. So if we wind up the high, you should start to hear a difference. You'll hear the very high frequencies get sharper and sharper. If we roll that off, the very high frequencies will be cut off. If you roll too much of the high frequency off, you may kill the sound altogether. We'll set it back to 0.
Each mark around the EQ knob represents 3 dB. Try to make your adjustments between 3 or 6 dB. The first knob allows you to cut or boost the mid frequencies. However, this has to be used with the second knob labelled frequency. The frequency range goes from 100 Hz all the way up to 8000 Hz. So if you know what frequency you want to adjust, you can just set the frequency dial to there and then apply a cut or a boost to that frequency. If you're not sure what frequency to adjust, there is a trick to determine the worst frequency. Set the mid EQ to a large boost, even up to plus 15 dB. Now sweep through the frequencies. Try to take note of the frequencies that sound the worst. So I think somewhere around the 250 Hz, we could cut some of that out. For a start, we'll wind it back to 0. Now we'll make a cut at that frequency to try and determine how much we need out. Like before, try a little less. You see, if we cut too much out, we'll destroy it. So to me that sounds good. This is useful when trying to EQ a female's voice to remove the harshness. You can also do this trick with feedback. You can add boost to the mid EQ, then sweep the frequencies, and take note of where the feedback is the worst. Then all you have to do is make a cut until the feedback goes away.
The low EQ is at 80 Hz. As previously mentioned, that's about where your subby works. So the more bass that you roll on, the more this will actually come out your subbies if you've got a separate set of subwoofers. We'll return that to 0. Now we'll have a listen to the EQ effect over music. So let's try and make an adjustment to the EQ and see what the music sounds like.
As previously advised, you wouldn't make such a large boost or large cut. This has been done for demonstration purposes only, so you can clearly hear the difference at the different frequencies. Ideally, you'd only make a 3 to 6 dB cut or boost at any one frequency.
Of course, your ears are the best guide to tell you when it's sounding correct.
Now let's listen to the stereo channel fixed frequency EQ adjustments. Each knob cuts or boosts an individual frequency band. Send it at 12 kHz for highs, 3 kHz for high mids, 500 Hz for low mid, and 80 Hz for low frequencies. Once again, just make minor adjustments, around 3 or 6 dB. Next we have the auxiliary buses. Aux1 signal is sent pre-fader, Aux2 is selectable between pre and post-fade, and Aux3 signal is sent post-fader.
A good use for auxiliary 1 is to run your monitors. You can dial up on each channel how much volume you want of each channel to end up into the monitor mix. To wire in the auxiliary to your fallbacks, you'll probably need an adapter cable. There'll be a 1/4 inch plug one side and the standard XLR the other. Plug that into Aux1 send. Plug the other end into your monitors. So we'll be using Aux1 to send a signal to our monitors.
Aux2 is from this jack and Aux3 is from this jack.
You can use these auxiliary ports to drive to external devices. you can send the signal out, and then when the signal comes back, you return it into these ports here. Or if it's a stereo return, you return it into these two.
The FX jack is the output from the effects unit. Not sure what you'd ever use this for.
We're going to be listening now through the headphone jack. If we press the solo button, we can now hear the music that is being sent onto Auxiliary 1. So at this point in time, there's no signal on the aux1 bus. We have to turn up the aux1 send on one of the channels to create a signal. Adjust the aux1 send so that it doesn't peak. Remember, we are listening through the headphones, so we are only hearing what goes out aux1, which we will route through to our monitors.
Because aux1 is pre-fade, it doesn't matter where the slider position is.
If you're using aux1 to send a signal to the effects unit, the returns from that unit will come in here. To control the volume of the stereo returns, you use these two volume knobs.
In a live concert scene, you may run into feedback problems with so many open microphones on stage. You could use Auxiliary 2 and select the send mode to be post-fade, which is the button in the up position.
If this switch is depressed, what happens is the monitors get a signal no matter where the sliders are. So if the sliders are off and it's in pre-slider mode, you'll get a signal through no matter where your sliders are. But it's an advantage in a live concert situation if you actually have them post-fader. The benefit of that will be when you pull your sliders down, not only will it drop the volume at the front, it will stop the microphone on stage from being able to feedback through the monitors.
To run the monitors through aux2, plug the cable into aux2 send. Then turn up aux send 2, press the solo to check the clipping. Turning the channel aux2 send up, with the slider down, the button up in the post-fade mode, we don't hear anything. But as soon as we press the button for pre-fade mode, we can hear the signal. Moving the slider in the pre-fade mode has no effect on the aux2 send. Only the aux2 send knob will affect the signal. With the button up in the post-fade mode, the slider now has effect on the aux2 send signal. The level being sent to the aux2 channel can only be adjusted by the aux2 send knob. Aux send 3
is an internal effects channel. To send a signal from the channel to the aux effects bus, increase this dial. I've currently got it set straight up and down at the 0 mark. You'll also need to set the aux end level. Rotate this dial and keep an eye on the meter. Check 1, 2, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Just like setting the channel gain, we want to make sure when we send the signal to the effects unit, we do not create clipping. You can also use the solo button and set the level meters into PFL mode. Check 1, 2 to check your signal. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2. Another thing to keep in mind, the more channels that you add to the effects bus will increase your input. Now to apply the effects to the channel so that you can hear it, rotate this dial and you'll hear the effects start to come on. The more you rotate, the thicker the effect is. Press the button and it'll alternate between the main mix and the effects will now be sending out
the subgroup.
So if you can't hear the effects, just make sure that button is correct. To select a different effect, use the program dial knob. Press down on the button to activate. Then check the signal. Check 1, check 2. Check 1. Check 1, 2. A good tip for live music. On your main vocalist, turn the effects down a little If you've got backing singers, turn their channels up slightly. Next we have the pan knob. Turn the knob right to send the signal to the right-hand channel of the stereo output. Turn the knob to the left to send the audio out through the left side of the stereo channel. The next button below will mute the channel. While the button is up, you'll be able to hear the output when you push the slider up. When muted, the whole channel is silent.
The mute button will stop the signal going to the sub bus and the main mix bus. It will not affect the auxiliary channel or the control room sends.
Next we have the channel slider volume. This controls the volume of the channel. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Ideally this should be set around the 0 mark, giving you a little bit of room above and below that you can control the volume of the sound. We've already spoken about the silo button. We'll use that to listen to this individual track.
To hear the channel, you must send the signal to either the subgroup bus or the main mix bus. You can use the subgroup button to group channels together, like the microphones on a drum kit. Then use the subgroup master slider to raise or lower all microphones on the drum kit. When using the subgroups, if you pan to the left, the signal will be sent to subgroup 1 only. And when you pan to the right, subgroup 2 only. In the middle, they'll be sent to both subgroups. If all the buttons above the subgroup are in the up position, then no signal will pass from the subgroup to the main mix. This might explain why you can't hear anything that you've routed through the subgroups. To route the signal from the subgroup bus to the main mix in stereo pairs, press the left button above the subgroup 1 and press the right button above the subgroup 2. If you are running separate mono channels on each of the subgroups and want to route both of the subgroups to the stereo mix, then depress all 4 buttons. You would normally not use the main mix and the subgroup buttons at the same time. The simplest routing is just to have each channel strip routed through the main mix bus by pressing this button. All channels will then be controlled by the main mix master sliders.
To use the stereo channel, we're going to use a plug that's got an 1/8 inch stereo plug one end and 2/4 inch mono plugs the other. We'll plug the 1/8 inch stereo plug into your phone or MP3 player, and the 2/4 inch mono plugs we'll put into the left and right inputs. Now to start playing some music on your phone or MP3 player, and we'll turn up the volume on the channel. The push button at the top of the channel strip is similar to the gain knob, although there's only 2 settings. Press the channel's PFL button and set the level indicators into PFL mode. Check the levels on both settings of the switch. As we can see, the levels are that low they don't register. So we're going to have to increase the volume on our phone or MP3 player. Recheck the settings for both switch positions. Go with the one that gives you the best levels without clipping. To use the CD or tape input, we're going to use a cable that's got a 1/8 stereo plug one end and 2 RCAs the other. Press the button labelled CD tape to main. The only control over levels is from your input device. If you want to record your event to tape or a media recorder, connect 2 RCAs to the tape output and the other ends to suit your recording device. Now everything that is sent out the main mix will be recorded. Check. Check 1. Check. Check 1. Check. We've already spoken about using the headphones to listen to each individual channel. Press the main mix button. Wind the headphone volume up to a suitable level to have a listen to the output being sent to the speakers. Check the LED level meter to make sure the main mix doesn't clip.
Turn the main mix off. Press the subgroup button to listen to what signal is being sent out the subgroups. Turn the subgroups off and press the CD tape button to listen to the CD tape input.
The foot switch jack allows you to change the program of the effects unit remotely via foot pedal. Along the back we have the power input cable. Use an XLR cable to connect the main outputs to your speakers. The power on switch and the phantom on switch. Only turn the phantom power on if your microphones require phantom power.
The 1/4 inch main mix outputs are balanced outputs in parallel with the XLR main mix outputs. You could use both of these outputs to generate 2 sets of left and right outputs. The sub-mix outputs are unbalanced. You could run these subs into another mixer.
The control room outputs are normally connected to monitor speakers housed in a control room for a recording situation.
Well, that's the end of this tutorial. I hope you've gained some understanding of the mixer.